you can switch on again. So I'm going to share my screen because I have a few slides. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, Oliver, for organizing the day. Thanks for taking the lead on this special issue in the British Journal of Management. Well, I guess we've got this panel, and we all are trying to say a few things about how to connect your paper to a special issue. So we had a first talk by Paul, and this was very much about how you connect your paper to BGM, which is the journal hosting the special issue, but as well as, you know, how you can connect your paper to, you know, something that is really important for our special issue, which is that your paper has to talk about our practice as management scholars and educators. Then we had this talk by Juliana that is very much about another critical aspect of the special issue core, which is how do you connect your research and your paper to the idea of desirable reality, desirable future. So I guess you've got some ideas now. And my role, I think, in this wonderful panel this afternoon is to perhaps help you position your work and say something about performativity as you work on your research. So I'm going to try to say a few things. I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat myself because it is very much about what we as management scholars mean by performativity. But kindly, Oliver suggested that instead of repeating myself, I would also try to say novel things and trying to say what happened to performativity 10 years ahead, meaning 10 years after some colleagues and myself have written a paper in the International Journal of Management Reviews, where we're trying to map the field and explain what performativity is in the organization and management theory field. So just a few words about myself. I was trained as an economist, and I have a very deep interest for rational choice theory and how we make decisions in organizations. And that's how I discovered this notion of performativity. So my primary interest at the very beginning was very much about the performativity of theories, building and drawing on the work of Michel Camus and colleagues, and more generally anchoring my work in the social studies of science perspective and blending it with the strategy as practice perspective. So I've got a couple of papers on this very specific topic of, you know, how do you bring this very abstract theory of decision making, the economic theory of choice, into being in organizations. And as we were working on this question, in particular with Jean-Pascal Gon, we were organizing different tracks and workshops at, of course, EGOS, but also symposia and PDW at the Academy of Management. And we were surprised to see that many colleagues were drawing on so many different conceptions and definitions and traditions of research when they were talking about performativity. So with my dear colleagues, Marc Clermont, Nancy Harding, and Jean-Pascal Gon, we decided to work all together to try to create a map and perhaps perform a stream of research in OMT, trying to understand what we as management scholars mean by performativity. So I'm going to very briefly explain what we found and what we said in this International Journal of Management Review paper. Basically, one of the inspiration of the paper as well was to try to understand, or more not understand, but reflect on the way we management scholars theorize. And one big idea that often we do theorize in organization studies by borrowing or importing concepts from other disciplines or other research traditions. And this is very much what we do in OMT when it comes to performativity. So a large part of the research 10 years ago was very much about borrowing the concept of performativity from sister disciplines. And mostly we were drawing on the work of John Austin, for instance, to study the power of strategy discourse, for instance, in organizations. We were also drawing on the work of sociologists such as Michel Calon or Donald Mackenzie to study particularly how economic theories perform the economy. So very much talking about the co-construction of social reality by theories and, well, practice, let's say. So that was a second very important stream of research, or nascent stream of research in OMT, should I say. Some colleagues were also drawing on the work of Judith Butler, of course, to study the constitution of gender and identities in the workplace. So they were mostly importing this notion of performativity from Judith Butler's work. Others were trying, it was 10 years ago, so it was the very beginning, to draw on the work of Karen Barad, another philosopher working at the intersection of sociology of science and gender studies. So a very sophisticated take on performativity. And finally, of course, we had colleagues coming from critical management studies and drawing on this, Jacques Derrida's understanding of performativity to talk about critical management studies. So these were, I would say, many different ways in which most of us were using performativity by applying this concept coming from a different discipline. Hopefully, though, there were also what we call three creative reconceptualization. And by this, we meant that we also observed, when we looked at the papers using the term performativity in their abstract mostly, we also observed that some of us were a bit more courageous, and they were trying to develop a more genuinely management take on performativity. So we identified three of these creative reconceptualization. One was very much about the constitutive communication of organization, with, for instance, the work of François Courren here in the picture. You will see I've got lots of pictures today. We also had, of course, a very important stream of research on routines, and they were themselves using the terms of performative versus ostensive routines. So here you've got Marta Feldman and Luciana D'Adelio, who has worked a lot on this topic. And in this kind of area of more creative reconceptualization, we also had a bunch of critical management scholars. And sorry, I put only male figures on the slide, but I could think of André Spicer and Peter Fleming, who were former colleagues at Bayes Business School, and we have Chris Vickert as well. So these were three creative reconceptualization. So I guess, I mean, if you are familiar with the paper, we already know all of this. So I try to ask myself, okay, what is new now? And 10 years later, because the paper was published about 10 years ago, have things changed? And have we seen a turn, a performative turn, or is performativity in full swing, as we say or claim in the call for paper? And I have to say that, yes, in a sense, there is a full swing. But I would say it's mostly a swing in Europe, let's say. So what I did is I very quickly, so don't quote me on that, but I tried to perform the same search on EBSCO database, the same as we did about 10, 15 years ago. And I selected the very same 15 journals or 13 journals. And I looked at papers which use the term performativity in their abstract. And as you can see, we have far more papers. It's about the same time period, because the first, I mean, the IGMR paper was looking at papers published between 1983 and 2013. And at the time, we identified and found 46 papers. And when I did the same search 10 years later, I found 128 papers published between 2014 and 2024. So you can see that already we've got far more papers on the same 10-year period. So that's good news. In a sense, this notion of performativity has sort of has had a generative potential, which was what we were hoping for. Then if we look a bit more closely at where are these papers published, you will see that this is mostly a European conversation because the major outlets that publish paper relying on this notion of performativity are first and foremost organization studies, with about 44 papers published in the past 10 years. Organization as well, with 31 papers published in the past 10 years. And human relations, with about 19, 20 papers. I was very pleased to see that we have a newcomer, which is the British Journal of Management, with 3 papers about, or at least talking about performativity over the past 10 years. So as I said, I mean, these are rough numbers and I haven't double-checked myself. So this is just to give you some ideas about the conversation. Sorry, can I move on? Yeah. So what are people doing with this notion of performativity nowadays, 10 years after? It still remains that they are doing so many different things. And because I think my role as a keynote speaker this afternoon is also to help you find the right conversation for your paper in the context of this special issue, I just selected a few, I think, let's say, important papers or, yeah, things you can look at, which will help you position your paper. So we have a couple of special issues. So one which I have organized and co-edited with Jean-Pascal Gon and Alex Wright in long-range planning. This is mostly about the performativity of strategy, but we have a few very interesting articles that also try to draw on different perspectives on performativity in order to advance our understanding of the performativity of strategy. And we have also 2 or 3 very interesting essays, one by Fabien Muniesa, which is very much about performative condition as being almost an anthropological condition. And as usual, a very interesting essay by Raghu Berwood, who is going to be the next speaker. There is another special issue in the British Journal of Management about impact, and definitely impact in this question of impact in the management community can be, and I think should be, linked to performativity. So we've got this special issue in the British Journal of Management. We have a very important special issue as well in organization studies. I say it's a very important special issue because it really connects performativity with power. And from my perspective, performativity has to be connected to power, because performativity, at least from my perspective, should be connected to some form of disruption of the established order. So I think when we are into this kind of approach to performativity, it's very important to reflect on the role of power. So if you are into this space, this conversation, please do have a look at the papers published in the special issue in organization studies. I think it was a couple of years ago, and the editors were Barbara Simpson, Nancy Harding, Peter Fleming, Viviane Sergi, and Anthony Husson. Then, of course, there is also a conversation around the performativity of theories. More specifically, you've got a very important piece by Emilio Marti and Jean-Pascal Gon in the Academy of Management Review, which has generated lots of debate. So there is a whole dialogue section in the Academy of Management Review. And if this is very much the kind of thing that you are interested in, I mean, the performativity of theories, please do have a look at those papers as well. And well, human relation is a wonderful source of inspiration as well, because they have developed a virtual special issue on critical performativity with all kinds of papers, which are really interesting, I think, in particular in the context of this special issue on management education and critical performativity. So that's another way for you to connect your work with performativity. And of course, I mean, I can not speak about a couple of papers by some of the guest editor of this special issue, such as this note from the editors on theorizing for positive impact, or a very nice paper by Laure Cabantous published in Human Relation. So some ideas, some key references, let's say, for you in order to find a way to connect your paper for this special issue with a specific conversation on performativity. And I'm going to conclude with a few thoughts. So where are we now, 10 years ahead? as I said, I think we are still doing a lot of things with this notion and concept of performativity. Perhaps I would say that we can see at least two orientations, and I say at least because there are probably more, but let's say for some scholars, performativity is one way of thinking about effects. So that's a different way of thinking about chains of causation and effects. But it remains a lot about, how you create effect in social reality. So it could be about how theories create effect in social reality and how eventually you observe some form of social change. So that would be one broad orientation, I would say, thinking of performativity still as a form of causation, more or less. And for other scholars, performativity perhaps is more a matter of a mindset. So it's a specific way of approaching reality. And of course, Raghu Garut can say a lot more than I can on this. But I think that's another perspective, another take on performativity, which, at least in my case, is a mindset that is very much grounded or, linked to actor network theory. So think about assemblage, network, and so on. So that's one of my thoughts 10 years ahead, looking at the papers on performativity. And then two more thoughts. I think when I looked at all these papers which have been published in the past 10 years, I would say that there is an increasingly autonomous way of thinking in organization and management theories about performativity, and I was very pleased with that. So I think there is kind of a more distant visions of the great authors who initiated the discussion on performativity, with fewer direct application of the concept of performativity, and a more frequent use of, blending different perspectives on performativity in order to develop a kind of original perspective on performativity. Some of these papers generating, or allowing us to understand new types of performativity. So I think that was an interesting trend that I noticed, and I think that's very promising. And the very final point from my side on these papers, I think we also see a growing number of phenomena of interest for people approaching or using performativity. So beyond, the study of routine, beyond the study of economic theory as co-constituting the economic reality, and beyond also gender performativity, I noticed that there are many papers on performativity connected to either climate change or more generally grand challenges. There are also a bunch of papers that really connect the notion of performativity with, let's say, broadly speaking, social issues in management. So looking at cooperative, alternative organization, the sharing economy, and so on. I was interested to notice that there are also a couple of papers that courageously, I should say, talk about the methodological challenge of using performativity as a lens. And obviously, and I think that's great, there is a clear connection or a growing connection between the notion of performativity and the issue of power, as I said in this special issue in organization studies in particular, but elsewhere as well. And finally, and I think this is really important for me personally, I would say, there is also a greater connection between the notion of performativity and a broad discussion, which is very much about the engagement of management scholar with practitioner, this notion of impact, and perhaps a reflection around this idea of intellectual activism. So I think that these are the 2-3 quotes that I had when I read some of these papers published in the past 10 years and using performativity. So and that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank